The university is in society. It's not outside. It's not sitting somewhere at the top of a hill. At its best, it is in dialogue with that society. It is connected to that society. It realizes that it is one, if you will, of the actors in society. So the knowledge we create at universities has to be in conversation with what's happening within society. I'm Kopano Ratele. I'm a professor at the University of South Africa. My main focus is studying masculinities, men and masculinities. But there's another big focus. This is African psychology. African psychology is psychology from the perspective of being situated in an African country, in Africa, but also in the African diaspora. To practice African psychology from the perspective of Africa, of being African, means that you're going to look at topics in psychology, such as the self, intelligence, cognition, relationships, trauma, as it occurs here, using theoretical tools that are developed here. So what you need to do is work towards a knowledge that is decolonial. The work of people who think about psychology from their situatedness in Africa, in an African country, is extremely important. Take a topic in social psychology, identity. If somebody imposes names on you or what you are from outside, what you have in that situation is already an alienation. They're alienating you from your own knowledge, from your own efforts to learn about who you are. So if you do not have an African situated psychology, an African-centered psychology, what it means basically is you will always have something like identity being explained by other tools. In Cape Town, in particular, as part of our colonial history, we have these statues all over the place that celebrate things like war, heroes of the Boer War or South African War, heroes of World War I, World War II, in the city, but also all kinds of the Tal Monument. And so they celebrate a particular group or a particular history that tends to be apartheid history or colonial history. And the famous one is of Mr. Rhodes. And when you go into UCT, you see this statue of this man who tells you that you are a thing, you are less than human. How can you not revolt? What the students were doing was a part of a long history around rising and says, no, we have our own heroes, basically, rising against colonial heroes. We might think South African students are too radical or that they protest too much, but this is what students do. The moment students realize that the conditions under which they learn are not optimal, they have to protest. 2015 was a big moment. I mean, it's such a big moment. Every time I've been returning to it about what did it mean for the students, for future students, for me as a teacher. How African psychology is related to this is clearly that when students get into the university, we have to think about what they are getting taught. If you have a textbook that doesn't say anything at all about you, about the life that you live, a textbook that centers on studies conducted mostly on European students or American students, and there's a lot of those in South African universities. If you have a textbook like that, you basically cannot relate your life to what you're learning in the class, particularly if that class is in the social sciences and behavioral sciences. So changing the languages under which we learn, the conditions under which we learn, the relationship between teacher and students is part of this work that we do as African psychologists, and in a larger context as decolonial scholars. So in one sense, a curriculum that starts from Africa and then goes to Europe and comes back to Africa is basically the kind of line that you want. You want to learn first about, okay, so who are the people who have been writing? What are we writing about in Africa? Ngugi, Achebe, Tabangla Liyong, Sembene, Alex Lakuma, Mongani Walisirode. So if you're doing English, you're reading then, and you start to see that they have had this struggle of voice against the dominant voices. And you learn about them first, and then you see what they were struggling about, and then you bring it back home. In psychology, the same sort of things. You learn about the conditions, you learn what about what other people are saying, and then you come back home and says, so how do we reconcile what we know with what other people say? But if you're only learning about Europe, about snow, about the fruit that you don't know, about the roads you don't know, while you don't know anything about the roads, the paths, the fruit, the seasons of where you live, you're already alienated. And basically, in African psychology, in one moment is a revolt. In another moment, it's about, well, let's write it from the perspective of our own lives, having been injured, traumatized by colonialism. And if the university wants to be at its best, if the university wants to understand its own role, but the kinds of usefulness of the knowledge that it creates, it has to be in conversation with other institutions of society, with the larger society and the larger world.